At 14 minutes past 8 on the first morning of 2026, while most of the country was still asleep, a 55-year-old man was found dying on a street in Leeds. The year was 8 hours old. He was already on its first page. Here is the strange thing. That same year, by the cold measure of the charts, was one of the safest in over a decade. Fatal cases down 11%, the lowest figures this century for young people. A country, on paper, getting safer. And yet a single month still filled itself with loss, from the Highlands of Scotland to the Essex coast, from homes to street corners. That gap between the reassuring number and the specific life behind it is what this video is about. 12 cases from 1 January. Some the courts have closed, most still waiting. Section 1. Dwayne Toohey. At 14 minutes past 8 in the morning, on Thursday the 1st of January 2026, police received a report of suspicious circumstances outside Gargrave Court in the Bermontofts area of Leeds. The report was that one man had attacked another who was on the floor. Officers arrived to find a man with serious injuries. He was taken to hospital and pronounced deceased a short time later. He was Dwayne Toohey, 55 years old. A 51-year-old man, Scott Silkstone, of no fixed address, was arrested at the scene and charged with the most serious offence there is, then remanded in custody to appear at Leeds Magistrates Court 2 days later, on Saturday the 3rd of January. 2 other people, a man and a woman, both 42, were arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender and released without charge. This is where the year began, and it sets out the one thing worth fixing in place before any of these cases go further. Scott Silkstone has been charged. He has not been convicted. There is no public account yet of what happened outside Gargrave Court that morning, beyond the report that reached the police, because that account belongs in a courtroom the case has not yet reached. So the rest of this section stays with what is known and fills in the things around it. Start with the time and the date, because together they are almost unbearably stark. 14 minutes past 8 in the morning, on the 1st of January. New Year's morning. For most people, that is one of the quietest, slowest hours in the whole calendar. The streets near empty, the city half asleep after the night before, the year ahead still feeling clean and unwritten. And it was into that stillness, just after 8 in the morning, that the report came. The year was hours old. The first page had barely been turned, and this was already on it. There is something about that contrast that sets the tone for everything to come. People tend to treat the 1st of January as a kind of fresh start, a reset, a line behind which the old year and all its troubles are left. But harm does not recognise that line. It does not pause for the symbolism. The same morning that millions of people spent resting, recovering, quietly hopeful about the months ahead, was also the morning a 55-year-old man lost his life on a street in Leeds. The clean page was not clean for everyone. Now look at the part of this case that teaches the single most important idea in this video, because it is all here, in one morning, laid out plainly. 3 people were arrested in connection with this death, but watch what happened to each of them, because they were not treated the same. One man was arrested and then charged. 2 other people were arrested on suspicion of a different, lesser thing, assisting an offender, and then both were released without charge. 3 arrests, 1 charge, 2 releases. Same incident, same morning, 3 very different outcomes. That spread is not random, and it is not the system being inconsistent. It is the system being careful, and it shows something most people never get to see laid out so clearly. An arrest is not a conclusion, it is an early step. The point at which the police have grounds to hold someone and look hard at what they actually have. From there, the paths divide based on the evidence. For one man, the path led to a charge, the formal step of bringing him into the court process. For the other 2, the path led the other way, to release without charge, because what the investigators had did not carry them that far. The same morning produced a charge and 2 releases, and each outcome matched what the evidence actually supported for that particular person. This is the answer to an instinct that this whole video is going to keep pushing back against. The instinct to hear that someone was arrested and treat that as proof they did something. 2 people here were arrested on suspicion of helping and then walked free without any charge at all. Picture how it would feel if the story had simply stopped at the word arrested, if that had been allowed to stand as the whole truth about them. 2 people would be carrying a stain they never earned. The system did not let that happen. It looked at what it had, found that it did not support a charge, and let them go. That is not the system failing. That is the system working exactly as designed, sorting carefully through who the evidence actually points to, and refusing to sweep everyone present into the same fate. There are, in fact, 3 separate stages hiding in this one case, and it is worth naming them because people blur them together constantly. There is arrested, which means the police are holding a person and asking questions. There is charged, which means a person has been brought formally into the court process. And there is found responsible, which comes only at the very end, after a court has heard everything and is sure. Each stage is a higher bar than the last, and a person only moves up to the next one if the evidence actually carries them there. In this single case, on this single morning, the lower stages sit side by side. 1 person charged, 2 arrested and then released. Nobody, yet, found responsible for anything because the court has not had its say. The second thing this case shows is what an open investigation looks like from the outside, and how the police try to bring the public into it. Even with a man charged, the case was described as still active, and the team leading it, the Homicide and Major Inquiry Team, appealed for anyone who had seen suspicious activity in or around Gargrave Court at the relevant time to come forward. That request points to something true about how these cases are actually built. They are not cracked open in a single flash of insight. They are assembled slowly, out of fragments, and a lot of those fragments now come from the ordinary recording devices scattered through daily life. The cameras on doorbells, the ones running in parked cars, the ones fixed to buildings. Each might hold a few seconds that matter. Casting the net wide is the police trying to gather every fragment while the events are still fresh. The detective leading the case also said something that points to a part of policing that often goes unnoticed. She acknowledged plainly that an incident of this nature would understandably cause concern in the local community, and she said neighbourhood officers were patrolling the area to provide reassurance, and that people should speak to them if they had worries. That is the quieter half of the job. A serious incident does not only affect the person harmed and their family, it sends a ripple of unease through a whole neighbourhood, through everyone who now walks past the spot and wonders. The visible patrols, the open door, the plain admission that people will be shaken, all of it is the police trying to steady a community, while they do the harder work of finding out what happened. But underneath all of it, the stages, the appeals, the careful language, sits the hard centre that will be at the heart of every case in this video. A man is gone. Dwayne Toohey was 55 years old. Whatever a court eventually finds about how he came to lose his life, that part is settled and will not change. 55 years of a life ended on the first morning of the year, with whatever family and friends he had now left to begin that year carrying his loss. The careful language used here about the man who has been charged takes nothing away from that. Both can be held at once, the fairness owed to a person who has only been accused, and the full weight of a life that has ended. Both will be held in every single case, all the way through. 2 more confirmed details give this case a fuller shape. The man charged, Scott Silkston, is due to stand trial from the 12th of July, which means that, like every open case in this video, the real answer to what happened on Gargrave Court is still months away even now. And the second detail is about the man who died, because he was a great deal more than the bare facts of a police report. Dwayne Patrick Toohey was the eldest son of a man named Jack and a brother to Michael. In the days after his death, his family set up a fundraiser to pay for his funeral, and the tribute that led it, written by his sister-in-law Tina, described him simply as deeply loved and his loss as something that had left the whole family devastated. That is the part no investigation timeline can hold. Before he was a case, before he was a date on the 1st of January, he was somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody worth raising money to lay to rest properly. The court process will deal with the rest. That part is already settled. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So that is where the month begins, on the first morning of the year in Leeds, with a death that crossed into a brand new year before almost anyone had begun to live it, and with a case still waiting for its day in court. From here, the video opens out across the whole of the United Kingdom and across the weeks of a single month. And the next case is one the courts have already finished with, which means it is one that can be spoken about plainly, with full certainty. It begins on a warm afternoon the previous July, on an ordinary residential street in Birmingham, with an argument that started over a few text messages. Section 2. Craig Dean. On the 7th of July, on Springfield Road in the Moseley area of Birmingham, a man named Craig Dean was standing outside an address when an argument flared up over a few text messages. His friends knew him as Yankee, and by every account that came out later, he was a much-loved dad. The case built on what happened next did not close until the end of January, 18 months on. But it started there, with something small. On its own, that is the kind of thing that fizzles out and gets forgotten by the next day. This one did not. At around 10 to 5 in the afternoon, a car pulled up outside the address. Two men got out. One was Hamza Khan, who was 23. The other was Mohammed Rahman, who was 25. What followed was a physical confrontation, and it was a serious one. Craig ended up on the ground, and even then it did not stop. When it was over, the two men got back into the car and drove away, leaving him behind with injuries that turned out to be far worse than anyone standing there could have known. He was taken to hospital. For 2 days, the people who loved him waited and hoped. But the harm done that afternoon was too much, and on the 9th of July, his life support was withdrawn. Craig Dean passed away. In the space of a single argument over a phone, a family lost a father, and a community lost someone a lot of people clearly cared about. Here is where the case turns into something worth understanding, because what happened next is the part most people never see. When someone loses their life like this, and the people responsible drive off, it can feel, in that first moment, like they have simply got away with it. No witnesses chasing them down, no one stopping the car, just an empty street and a family in pieces. And yet the two men who left Springfield Road that afternoon were both found, both charged, and both held to account. The reason they were is a quiet lesson in how modern investigations actually work, and it has very little to do with luck. The officers from West Midlands Police started with almost nothing except a location and a time. So they did the unglamorous thing that solves most cases like this. They went looking for cameras. A city is covered in them now, far more than people realise, from shop fronts to traffic systems to doorbells, and a team that knows what it is doing can follow a single vehicle across a patchwork of all of them. It is slow, tiring work, sitting through hour after hour of footage, but it pays off. Piece by piece, the team traced the car that had pulled up outside the address, and following that car is what led them to the two men. Then came the part that sealed it. The car, a Vauxhall Corsa, was found not far away. Inside it were 2 drink cans. To anyone glancing in, they would have looked like rubbish, the kind of thing no one would think twice about. But a person cannot drink from a can without leaving a tiny trace of themselves on it. The forensic team tested those 2 cans, and the results were not vague or open to argument. The genetic material on them belonged to Khan and to Rahman. 2 ordinary cans, left behind without a second thought, placed both men exactly where the investigators believed they had been. This is the thing about evidence like that. It does not get nervous on the stand. It does not change its story. It does not forget. A can with someone's genetic material on it says the same thing on the first day as it does a year later in a courtroom. And that steadiness is exactly why this kind of evidence carries so much weight. The 2 men had left a piece of the truth sitting in a parked car, and it waited there patiently until the right people came to collect it. Once the investigators knew who they were looking for, the search moved fast, and both men, it turned out, had tried to put distance between themselves and what had happened. Khan was found on the 16th of July inside a holiday rental property over in Worcestershire, away from the city. Rahman had gone further still. He had left the country, and he was arrested at Heathrow Airport on the 25th of July, the moment he came back into the UK. Neither of those attempts to slip away worked. One man was tracked to a rented house in another county. The other was waiting to be picked up the instant his return flight landed. Both were then charged with the most serious offence there is. And then, as happens with almost every case in this video, there was a long wait. This is the part that tests families more than people on the outside understand. The harm was done in July, the arrests came within weeks, but the trial, the actual moment where all the evidence is laid out and tested in front of a jury, did not arrive for months. That gap is not the system being lazy, it is the system being careful. A serious case cannot be rushed, because rushing it is how mistakes get made and the wrong outcome slips through. So the family of Craig Dean had to do the hardest thing of all, which is to keep living through the ordinary days while the most important question of their lives sat unanswered. It was finally answered on the 30th of January at Birmingham Crown Court. After hearing everything, the jury found both Hamza Khan and Mohammed Rahman guilty. The trail of camera footage, the car found nearby, the 2 cans with their genetic material, the flight to Worcestershire and the flight out of the country, all of it added up to a conclusion the court was sure of. The 2 men who had pulled up outside that address in July were the 2 men responsible for the loss of Craig Dean's life. That is not a theory or an accusation anymore. It is a finding, made by a jury, in the proper place, the way it is supposed to be made. When the sentences came, a few weeks after the verdict, on the 24th of February, the court set out the weight of what the 2 men had done. Both were given life imprisonment. Hamza Khan was ordered to serve a minimum of 17 years before he could even be considered for release, and Mohammed Rahman a minimum of 17 years and 6 months. By that point, Rahman had already spent 211 days held in custody, waiting for the case to conclude. Time that counts toward a sentence, but does nothing to give back the years a family has lost. The sentencing also filled in the background to that afternoon, and it was bleaker than a simple argument. The court found that the 2 men had a transactional relationship with Craig Dean, connected to the supply of drugs, and that they had regarded him as someone who should stay loyal to their operation rather than buy elsewhere. The judge could not be sure they had come to Springfield Road for the sole purpose of finding him, and accepted they were continuing their trade at the same time, but he rejected, as the jury had, any suggestion that the 2 men acted in self-defence. The court found there had been a brief initial struggle, no more than pushing and shoving, with no weapon involved and neither man injured, before Craig fell to the ground. And then the attack continued. The medical evidence the court heard was difficult, and it explains why injuries from a street confrontation proved fatal. A specialist doctor, a neuropathologist, told the court that the kicks must have involved substantial force, pointing to a fatal injury to an artery, deep bruising to the neck, and widespread injury to the nerve fibres. The court heard evidence that one of the 2 men may have delivered a forceful kick to Craig's head. Though the judge was clear, it did not matter which of them struck which blow, because this was a joint attack and both were equally responsible for its result. What the 2 men did afterwards mattered to the court as well. Both stopped using their phones and fled the city. Khan hid in rural Worcestershire and was found only because the police tracked him down. Rahman went as far as Bangladesh and returned only to be arrested at the airport the moment he landed. The flight, the hiding, the abandoned phones, all of it was treated as evidence of 2 men who knew exactly what they had done and were trying to escape the consequences of it. The distance did not save them. What stays with anyone about this one is not really the investigation, clever as it was, it is the family. Through the whole thing, the officers kept Craig's daughters informed, walking them through each stage with the support that families in this position are given. And when the verdict landed, his daughters spoke about him. They did not talk about the case, they talked about their dad. They thanked the community for refusing to let him fade into a name on a news page and for demanding that something be done. They mentioned that a group set up online in his memory had grown to around 600 members, and they said that number told everything about how many lives he had touched. They called him an amazing father. That was the word that mattered to them, not the details of the court. Just father. There is something in that worth sitting with for a second. A case like this gets filed under crime, under statistics, under the cold yearly chart from the start. But to the people who actually lived it, it was never about any of that. It was about a man who used to be there and now was not. The 600 names in that online group were not following a news story. They were a town's worth of people saying, in the only way they could, that he counted. And back to where this video opened. A capital and a country that, measured by the numbers, were getting safer. The lowest yearly figures in over a decade. Real progress, honestly reported. Craig Dean is the reminder that a falling chart is built out of months, and a month is built out of days. And on one ordinary July day, a long way from any statistic, a man stood outside a house and a few text messages turned into the end of his life. The chart can go down, and that can still be true. Both things sit side by side, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. His case also shows the most hopeful thing this video has to offer, which is that leaving the scene is not the same as escaping it. Two men drove away from Springfield Road believing the distance would protect them. One rented a place in another county, one boarded a plane, and a patient team with camera footage and 2 discarded cans undid all of it, calmly, over the months it took. The truth they left sitting in a parked car was still there when the investigators arrived, and it did not waver once it reached the courtroom. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the version of January where the story has an ending. The jury has spoken, the question is closed, and the careful word accused has become the settled word guilty. But not every case from this month ran the way the people responsible expected. The next one did not happen on a public street where cameras could follow a car. It happened somewhere a person is supposed to be safest of all, behind their own front door. And it pulled in not 2 people, but 4. Section 3. Jacqueline Rutter. At around 1 in the morning on a Sunday in the autumn of 2022, a black Vauxhall Insignia pulled up outside a home in Morton on the Wirral. Inside lived Jacqueline Rutter, 53, a mum of 6 and a grandma of 5, known to everyone as Jackie. The case that ended in Merseyside at the close of January 2026 reaches all the way back to that night, more than 3 years earlier. What happened to her that night is hard to take in, precisely because it was so ordinary right up until the moment it was not. It was around 1 in the morning. A car, a black Vauxhall Insignia, pulled up outside her address. 3 men were inside it. 2 of them got out from the back of the car and walked up to her front door. One of those 2 was a man named James Byrne. They knocked, or did whatever it took to bring her to the door, and when Jackie answered, expecting who knows what at 1 in the morning, a weapon was used against her. She was harmed twice at her own doorstep, and she suffered an injury to her chest that she would not survive. The 2 men did not linger. They turned, walked back to the car, and got in. The 3rd man, the one who had stayed behind the wheel the whole time, was named Barry Glynn, and he drove them away. Emergency services were called to the address, but the harm done to Jackie was too severe, and she passed away there at her home. A family of children and grandchildren lost the person who held them all together, in the place she should have been safest. Now here is the part that shows this was not a moment of chaos or a robbery gone wrong. It was planned, and the plan had more moving parts than just the car at the door. While those 3 men were carrying out what happened at the house, a 4th man was waiting nearby. His name was Simon Allen, and he had been positioned with 2 other vehicles ready, a silver Ford and a Yamaha motorbike. After the car came back from Jackie's address, it was Allen who set it alight, burning it in the Morton area to get rid of whatever traces it carried. And there was a 5th piece too, a man named David Harrison, who was involved in moving the others around before and after, and who helped with the effort to clean up afterwards. So step back and look at the shape of it. A car to carry out the act, a driver to get them away, a 2nd man waiting with spare vehicles to destroy the 1st car the moment it was no longer needed, a man helping to ferry people and tidy away the evidence. This was not one person acting on a bad impulse. It was a group, each with a job, and the jobs fit together. That is what made the case so serious, and it is also, strangely, what made it possible to solve. Because the more people involved in something like this, the more threads there are for investigators to pull on, and pull on them they did. The investigation took its time, the way these always do, and eventually all of the people involved were identified, traced, and brought before the courts. The trial itself was not a quick afternoon. It ran for more than 3 months. 3 months of evidence, of witnesses, of the jury being walked through every detail of that autumn night and everything that led up to it and came after it. For Jackie's family, that meant sitting through it, hearing the worst day of their lives described over and over in a courtroom, holding on for the answer at the end. The answer came at the end of January, more than 3 years after Jackie lost her life. And the court did not treat all 4 men the same, which is one of the most important things to understand about how justice actually works. The law does not just ask whether a person took part, it asks what exactly a person did, and what exactly a person intended. Those are different questions, and the answers can land people in very different places. 3 of the men, James Byrne, Simon Allen, and David Harrison, were found responsible for the most serious offence there is, along with offences relating to the weapon and to the burning of the car. The judge was clear about these 3. He said the act against Jackie had been thought out and carried out by them, not stumbled into, planned. The 4th man, Barry Glynn, the driver, was treated differently, and the reason why is genuinely worth slowing down on, because it is the kind of detail that separates a careful court from an angry mob. The jury looked hard at what was going on in Glynn's mind that night. To find a person responsible for the gravest offence, a jury has to be sure that the person intended at least really serious harm. With Glynn, they could not be sure of that. They were sure he intended harm, but they were not sure he intended harm of the most serious kind. And because they were not sure, the law does not let them guess. It does not round up. So Glynn was found responsible for the lesser of the 2 offences, the one that fits a person who was part of something harmful, but whose intention the jury could not pin down at the very top level. That distinction is not a loophole, and it is not the system going soft. It is the system being honest about the limits of what 12 people can know for certain about what was inside someone's head. Sure or not sure. Proven or not proven. The court would rather name the exact thing it is certain of than slap the biggest possible label on everyone and hope for the best. The trial also made plain why this happened, and the reason was as small and as senseless as it gets. The court heard that the attack was a revenge shooting, set in motion 2 days earlier when Jacqueline's sons had taken a mobile phone used to run a drug dealing operation, a line the gang referred to by a name of its own. In the world these men operated in, that act was treated as a humiliation, something the judge said Byrne and others had decided would not go unpunished because they did not want to lose face. A grandmother lost her life over a stolen phone and a bruised sense of pride. The court was careful about the roles, as courts are. James Byrne, who fired the gun, was found to have played a leading part in both the planning and the killing, alongside another man who had fled the country and remained beyond the reach of the court, believed to have left for Turkey. The judge found that the other 3 had become involved through their own drug addictions, rather than because Byrne had exploited them. He also noted that Byrne was already serving a life sentence for an attempted murder, which tells you the kind of person who arrived at Jacqueline's door that night. The family's words at sentencing were unflinching. The partner of one of Jacqueline's sons addressed Byrne directly, calling him a coward who had picked an isolated grandmother as an easy target late at night. She said Jackie's final moments should have been spent surrounded by the people who loved her, and instead, she had died in fear. No sentence the court could hand down was ever going to answer that. When it came to sentencing, the numbers were heavy, and they reflected those differences. The 4 men were sent to prison for a combined total of 124 years. James Byrne, named as one of the 2 who went to the door, received the longest term for the main offence, 40 years, with further years for the weapon and the fire running at the same time. Simon Allen, the man who had waited with the spare vehicles and burned the car, received 28 years for the main offence, with more on top for the other matters. David Harrison, who had moved the others and helped clear up, received 26 years, again with additional years alongside. And Barry Glynn, the driver found responsible for the lesser offence, received 30 years, with the court setting out that he must serve at least 2/3 of that behind bars before he could even be considered for release. The senior officer who led the investigation spoke afterwards about what this had really been. He pointed out that Jackie was a mum of 6 and a grandma of 5 who had been harmed in her own home, the one place anyone should feel secure. He described the actions of the 4 men that night as violent and calculated, firing a weapon at close range at a woman as she simply opened her own front door. And he said that all 4 were now where they belonged, where he hoped they would spend their time thinking about what they had done. The judge added something that has stayed with a lot of people who followed the case. He said Jackie had been an innocent victim of the kind of extreme violence that swirls around the criminal drugs world. The point being that she herself was not part of that world at all. She was simply a woman at home, and that world reached out and took her anyway. Her death, he said, had caused a grief her family would have to carry for the rest of their lives. But the words that matter most did not come from the judge or the police. They came from Jackie's own family. Her daughter-in-law spoke on their behalf, and she did not talk about the 4 men, or the car, or the trial. She talked about Jackie. She said that to them, Jackie had a heart of gold and loved everybody. That she did not have a bad bone in her body. And she said something quietly powerful, which was that Jackie would not be defined by what had happened to her. She would be remembered instead as the beautiful mother and grandmother she had always been. Hold on to that, because it is the thing this video keeps coming back to. The court system measures a case in charges and years and verdicts. The news measures it in headlines. But the family refuses all of that. They take the worst thing that ever happened to them and refuse to let it turn her into that. She was a grandma of 5. She had a heart of gold. The 124 years belong to the 4 men. Jackie belongs to her family, and she always will. There is one more reason this case sits where it does in this video. Think back to the last one, the case in Birmingham, where 2 strangers drove up to an address over an argument. This one is darker in a particular way, because of the planning. The spare vehicles waiting. The car burned the moment it had done its job. The rolls handed out in advance. This was not heat and impulse. It was cold and organised, and it was aimed at a woman who had done nothing to invite it. And still, even with all that planning, the people behind it ended up named in a courtroom and sent away for more than a century between them. Organisation did not save them. It just gave the investigators more to find. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So far, every case examined has involved people arriving from the outside, a car pulling up, strangers at a door. But the next one did not work like that at all. The danger in the next case did not drive up out of the night. It had been close to the victim for a long time already, and that is what made it so hard to see coming. Section 4. James Self. James Self died in hospital on the 21st of December 2023. The person later found responsible for his death, a woman with the surname Murphy, was not a stranger. She had been part of his life for some time, and the court would hear that the night he was seriously harmed was not the start of his suffering, but close to the end of a long road. This case, which closed on the Essex coast in the middle of January 2026, is the one where the danger came from inside. The court case that followed made something clear. The night he was seriously harmed was not the start of his suffering. It was closer to the end of a long road. Then continue with, the court heard that James had been put through a sustained campaign of abuse before that night. That word, campaign, is the one the court used, and it is worth pausing on because it conveys the shape of what happened. A campaign is something ongoing. It has a direction. It builds. And in cases between 2 people who know each other well, that build is often invisible to everyone on the outside, sometimes even to the person living through it, until it has gone very far indeed. To understand why a case like this matters so much and why it is treated so seriously by the courts, it helps to understand a hard truth about harm in general. When most people picture danger, they picture a stranger, a dark street, someone they have never met. It feels safer to imagine it that way because a stranger is something that can, in theory, be avoided. But a great deal of the most serious harm that happens to people does not come from strangers at all. It comes from inside their own lives, from people they let close, from people they trusted or even loved. That is part of what makes this kind of case so difficult, and part of why the law has worked hard over many years to take it as seriously as harm that comes from outside. There was a time, not all that long ago, when harm between people in a relationship was treated as a lesser thing, almost a private matter, something the law preferred not to look at too closely. That has changed, and it changed for good reasons. The courts now recognise that the home can be the most dangerous place of all for some people, and that the slow, grinding harm of an ongoing campaign can be every bit as destructive as a single, sudden act. The James Self case sits inside that modern understanding. The court did not treat what happened to him as a one-off. It looked at the whole pattern, the long lead-up as well as the final harm, and it weighed all of it. It is worth pausing to explain how the law in England and Wales now handles a case built on a pattern rather than a single moment, because it is different from how it once worked, and the difference is the whole reason a case like this can be told properly. For a long time, the law tended to look at harm one instant at a time, a particular night, a particular injury, each event examined more or less on its own. The trouble with that approach is that it can miss the thing that matters most, which is the shape of the whole. A single shove looked at in isolation might seem minor. The same shove, understood as one moment in a long campaign of control and fear, means something entirely different. The courts now allow that fuller picture to be drawn, so that a pattern of behaviour stretching over weeks or months can be laid before a jury as a single, connected story, rather than a scattering of separate dots. That shift is why so much of a case like James Self's rests on testimony about the time before the final harm. The court is not only asking what happened on the worst night, it is asking what had been happening for a long while before it, and whether the final act was the end point of something that had been building. Reading the pattern is not a distraction from the central question. In cases like this, the pattern often is the central question, and the law has slowly reshaped itself to make sure that pattern can actually be seen. The judge who handled the case, His Honour Judge Christopher Morgan, spoke directly about how Murphy had behaved, and his words drew a picture of someone whose conduct toward James had turned increasingly alarming. He described how she became erratic, how she became volatile, how she became threatening. Those are escalating words, and they describe a person whose behaviour was getting worse, not better, over time. The judge also pointed to a specific moment, one that gives a small, concrete window into the larger pattern. Around the 7th of October, Murphy threw a phone at James's head and caused a black eye. One object, one injury, one date, but it stands in for the campaign as a whole, the kind of incident that, the court found, was happening as part of a sustained pattern rather than in isolation. The judge also touched on what could set Murphy off, and here the case becomes especially sad, because the triggers were so small. The court heard that she took offence at things that should have meant nothing at all. When James responded to her in gentle, conciliatory terms, the kind of calming response a person uses when they are trying to keep the peace, her reaction was not to soften, it was to turn the abuse physical. Think about what that means for the person on the receiving end. The normal tools a person would use to diffuse a situation, staying calm, being kind, trying to smooth things over, did not work. They made things worse. When the very act of being gentle invites harm, a person is left with nowhere safe to stand. After James died and the case made its way toward trial, it followed the same long path every case in this video follows. He passed away in December 2023. The verdict did not come until the 13th of January 2026, more than 2 years later, at Chelmsford Crown Court. That is 2 years of his family waiting, 2 years of carrying the loss without the answer. And when the answer came, the jury found Murphy responsible for the most serious offence there is. The sentence followed a few weeks afterwards, on the 4th of February, at the same court. She was given a life term, with the court ordering that she serve a minimum of 15 years before she could even be considered for release. The most powerful voice in this case, as in so many of them, was not the judge or the lawyers. It was James's mother. Her name is Ash, and she gave a statement that was read at the sentencing, and it is the kind of thing that stays with anyone long after the legal details fade. She spoke about the double weight she was carrying. There was the grief of losing her son, which would be unbearable on its own. But layered on top of that was something almost worse, which was learning, only in the courtroom, the full extent of what he had been through. The verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, the physical abuse. A mother sitting in a public court, hearing for the first time the details of how badly her child had been treated in the time before he died. She described that combination as utterly unimaginable, and one does not have to be a parent to understand why. She said something else that lands hard. She talked about the lack of humanity shown after the final harm was done to James, and she said that this was imprinted on her mind and would haunt her for the rest of her days. That is a mother telling a court, plainly, that some images do not leave, that the loss is one thing, but the manner of it is another, and the manner of it will stay with her until her own last day. And yet, even inside all that pain, she found room for something else. She thanked the people who had, in her words, heard James's voice in the dark and believed him. Think about that phrase for a moment, because it carries so much. James's voice in the dark. The voice of someone who had been suffering quietly, whose pain had not been fully seen while he was alive, but whose story was finally heard and believed once it reached the people whose job it was to listen. The officers, the medical experts, the prosecutors. She was grateful that they had taken him seriously, that they had honoured him, that they had stood up for him when he was no longer able to stand up for himself. She said the sharp pain of loss might fade with time, but the sadness would always be there. There is a reason this case earns its place in this video, beyond the simple fact that it closed in January. It is a reminder that danger does not always announce itself. The two cases before this one involved people arriving from outside, and in a strange way, that is the version of harm that is easiest to picture and easiest to fear. This case is the harder one to look at, because it shows that some of the gravest harm grows slowly, in close quarters, from someone already woven into a person's daily life. There was no car pulling up, no moment where James could have locked a door against a stranger. The pattern was already inside, already part of his world, building quietly until it reached its terrible end. It is also a reminder of why the courts now refuse to look away from this kind of case. For a long time, harm like this went under-recognised, treated as smaller than it was. James Self's case is the opposite of that. The court examined the full campaign. It listened to the pattern, not just the final night. It heard a mother describe the abuse her son had hidden, and it responded with a life sentence and a long minimum term. That is the system saying, as clearly as it can, that what happened to James mattered, and that the slow harm done to him in private was every bit as serious as anything done in public. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every case so far has been one the courts have already finished with: Birmingham, Merseyside, and now Essex. 3 verdicts, 3 conclusions, 3 families given at least the cold comfort of an answer. But the cases that began in January are a different thing entirely, because most of them have no answer yet. They are still open, still being built. And the next one moves away from England altogether, to a confrontation outside a property in the far north of Scotland, where 1 man lost his life, 2 more were hurt, and the full story is still waiting for its day in court. Section 5. Inverness. At around 8:25 on the morning of Friday the 9th of January 2026, Police Scotland received a report that 3 men had been injured outside a property on Boulogne Road in Inverness. 2 were taken to hospital by ambulance, the 3rd made his own way there. 1 man was pronounced dead on arrival. The other 2, aged 21 and 38, were treated for minor injuries and discharged. 2 men were arrested and charged in connection with the death, and were due to appear at Inverness Sheriff Court. That is the whole of what is confirmed, and from here the video changes. Everything up to now had an ending. This case does not yet have one. This one took place a long way from the big English cities. It happened in Inverness in the far north of Scotland, a place often called the capital of the Highlands. For anyone who has never been, picture a fairly small, calm city, surrounded by mountains and water. The kind of place people move to precisely because it feels safe and quiet. It is not somewhere associated with this kind of mourning. That contrast is part of what made it land so hard locally. Serious harm can happen anywhere, but it feels different when it lands somewhere people think of as peaceful. Here is what is confirmed, and the account will stick strictly to it. At around 8:25 on the morning of Friday the 9th of January 2026, Police Scotland received a report that 3 men had been injured outside a property on a road called Boulogne Road in Inverness. Police and emergency services went to the scene. 2 of the men were taken to hospital by the Scottish Ambulance Service. The third made his own way to hospital for treatment. One of the men, sadly, was pronounced dead on arrival at hospital. The other 2, one aged 21 and one aged 38, were treated for injuries described as minor, and they were later discharged. 2 men were arrested and charged in connection with the death, and they were due to appear at Inverness Sheriff Court. This is an open case. It has not been tried. There is no public account of what the confrontation was about, who these men were to each other, or what led to that morning on Boulogne Road. The place for that is a courtroom. So what follows stays with what is known and explains the things around it. The first of those things is that this happened in Scotland, and Scotland runs its own legal system, separate from the one in England and Wales. A lot of people do not realise quite how separate it is. The United Kingdom is one country, but it is not one single justice system. England and Wales share one, Scotland has its own, Northern Ireland has its own again. They each have their own courts, their own procedures, and in Scotland's case, even some of its own legal language not heard south of the border. That is visible straight away in this case. The 2 men were due to appear at a sheriff court. In Scotland, a sheriff court is one of the main courts that handles criminal cases, and a sheriff there is a judge, not the kind of sheriff that might come to mind from somewhere else entirely. The most serious cases in Scotland can be sent up to an even higher court, the High Court of Justiciary, which deals with the gravest matters. So the fact that these men were due before a sheriff court is simply the Scottish system beginning to do what it does, taking the first steps along its own path, which looks a little different from the English one, but is built to do the same job, which is to test the facts fairly before anyone is judged. Why does that matter for a video like this? Because it explains something that might otherwise seem strange, which is why the cases from different parts of the UK come with different amounts of detail and different words attached. It is not that one place is hiding things and another is being open. It is that 4 separate systems are each doing things their own way. Gathering a single month's cases from across the whole of the UK really means looking at the work of several different justice systems at once, each with its own customs. The Inverness case looks and sounds a little different from the Birmingham one, not because anyone decided to treat it differently, but because it is travelling through a different system entirely. The second thing worth understanding is the single most important idea in this entire video, and this case is the perfect place to slow down and really explain it, because everything that follows depends on it. The 2 men in this case have been charged. They have not been found responsible for anything. Those 2 states are not the same, and the gap between them is enormous. Being charged means the authorities believe they have enough to bring a person before a court and put a case to them. That is all it means. It is the start of the process, not the end of it. It is an accusation that now has to be tested. Being found responsible, on the other hand, comes right at the far end of that process, after all the evidence has been laid out, after both sides have had their say, after the people whose job it is to decide have weighed everything and reached a conclusion they are sure of. A charge is a question. A verdict is the answer. And in this case, as in most of the January cases, the matter is still at the question stage. The answer has not come yet. This is not a dry technicality. It is the thing that protects every single person. Imagine being in that position, a name attached to the worst possible accusation, and a video deciding the matter before any court had heard a word. Anyone would want exactly what the law gives these 2 men, which is the right to be treated as not responsible until a court, having seen everything, says otherwise. That right does not exist because the law is soft. It exists because the alternative, a world where an accusation is treated as proof, is a world where innocent people get crushed. So these men have been charged, and that is where the case sits today. And that careful approach has to apply to the 2 surviving men as well, the 21-year-old and the 38-year-old, who were hurt and later discharged. The fact that they were injured is known. What part anyone played in what happened that morning is not known from anything on the public record, and guessing has no place here. 3 men were hurt outside that property. 1 did not survive. 2 did. 2 others were arrested and charged. How all of those pieces fit together is exactly the thing a court exists to work out, and it has not done so yet. What can be done, without overstepping a single fact, is to sit for a moment with the human shape of this. A Friday morning in January, 8:25, the time of day when a normal town is just waking up, people heading out, the ordinary start of an ordinary day, and on one street in a quiet Highland city, that ordinary morning broke open, and by the end of it 1 man was gone and 2 more were in hospital. The senior officer leading the case, Detective Chief Inspector John Lumsden, said his thoughts remained with the family and friends of the man who died, and that officers would be carrying out extensive inquiries with an increased police presence in the area in the days that followed. That last detail points to something too. An increased presence is partly practical, gathering information, and partly about reassurance, a quiet signal to a shaken community that they have not been left alone with it, because that is the real cost of a morning like this. And it is a cost that does not show up in any court record. A man's family lost him, but a whole neighbourhood also lost a little of its sense of safety. People who walked that road every day without a second thought now had a reason to think twice. In a small city especially, where so many lives overlap, a single morning can change the feel of a place. The statistics this video opened with would barely register it. 1 case in 1 month in 1 northern city. But to the people on Boulogne Road, it was not a statistic at all. It was their street. And so this case sits in a kind of suspended state, which is exactly where a great many serious cases genuinely are at any given moment. The harm has been done and cannot be undone. The process has begun. But the ending, the part where a court finally says what happened and who, if anyone, is responsible, lies somewhere in the future, on a date not yet reached. That waiting is uncomfortable. It does not give the clean resolution the earlier cases did, but that is where this one stands. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Inverness sits near the top of the country, and its case is still waiting for its day in court. But staying in Scotland for a moment, there is another case that reached the opposite point in the very same month. Down in Glasgow, a story that began with a disturbance on a city street years earlier finally arrived at its ending in the last days of January. And unlike the morning on Boulogne Road, this one can be talked about plainly, because a jury already has. Section 6. Brian Goff. On Saturday, the 18th of May 2024, in the Postle Park area of Glasgow, Brian Goff, 27, was seriously injured during a disturbance on Saracen Street. He was taken to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and died a short time after arriving. On Friday the 30th of January 2026, a jury at the High Court in Glasgow delivered its verdict. Because that verdict has been reached, this is a case that can be spoken about with certainty rather than caution. That is the bare shape of the beginning, set down plainly because, for this case, plainly is exactly the right way. There is no need to hedge here, no need to wrap everything in careful language about what might or might not have happened, because the careful stage is over. A jury has heard the full account, weighed it, and decided. What follows is what the court found, not a guess and not an accusation. It is a conclusion the legal system has already reached and stands behind. What the court found was this. 2 men were involved and they shared a surname. A man named Kevin Shanley, who was 37, was found responsible for the most serious offence there is in connection with Brian's death. A second man, Kyle Shanley, who was 28, was found responsible for a different and lesser offence, an assault. So the jury did not treat the 2 men as one and the same. It separated them, and it gave each of them the verdict that matched what the evidence showed about what each had actually done. That separation is worth slowing down on, because the very same thing happened in the Merseyside case earlier, and seeing it twice shows it is not an accident. It is how the system is built to work. When more than one person is caught up in something serious, the court does not simply sweep them all into the same outcome. It looks at each person on their own. What did this one do? What did that one do? What did each of them intend? and it hands down a separate verdict for each, even when those verdicts are very different from one another. In Glasgow, one man was found responsible for the gravest offence and the other for an assault. Same incident, same street, same day. Two different findings, because the evidence pointed to two different levels of involvement. This is one of the quiet strengths of the whole process, and it is easy to miss. From the outside, it might seem simpler, even fairer in a rough sort of way, to treat everyone present at a serious incident exactly the same. But that simplicity would be a kind of lie. People do not all play the same part. To pretend they do, to flatten every person into one identical outcome, would mean punishing some people for more than they actually did, and that is precisely the unfairness the courts are built to avoid. So they take on the harder task. They sort out who did what. The Shanley verdicts are that careful sorting in action. After a jury reaches its decision, there is usually one more step before a case is fully closed, and that step is sentencing. The two are not the same thing, and people often run them together in their minds. The verdict is the finding, the moment the court decides what a person is responsible for. The sentence is what comes next, the decision about what should follow from that finding, how many years, what conditions. And those two moments do not always happen on the same day. In this case, the verdict landed on the 30th of January, but the two men were not sentenced straight away. The court set a later date for that, in the middle of March. So between the verdict and the sentence there was a gap of several weeks. That gap is deliberate, and it serves a real purpose. Before deciding on a sentence in a serious case, a court often wants more information. Reports may be prepared, background may be gathered. Both sides may be given the chance to say things that bear on what the sentence should be. Rushing that final step would risk getting it wrong, and a sentence is not something to get wrong, because it shapes years of a person's life, and it is the last formal word the court will say about the harm done to the victim. So the court takes the time it needs. The finding comes first, firm and settled. The full consequence is worked out carefully afterwards. For Brian Gough's family, that meant that the end of January brought the answer to the central question: who was responsible, while the final chapter of the sentence still lay a little further ahead. The senior officer who investigated the case, Detective Chief Inspector Laura Young, spoke after the verdict, and her words cut straight to the heart of it. She described what had happened as a shocking and violent incident, and she said the impact on Brian's family and friends had been devastating. That is a simple, honest way to put something that does not really have adequate words. A young man of 27, lost as a result of a disturbance on a street in his own city, and a circle of family and friends left to absorb a loss they never saw coming. She also noted, plainly, that the two men would now face the consequences of what they had done. With the verdict in, that was no longer a hope or a promise. It was simply what was going to happen. It is worth stepping back and noticing how this case rhymes with the others already examined, because the pattern is becoming clear. In Birmingham, the harm was done in July and the verdict came the following January, around 18 months later. In Merseyside, the loss came in the autumn of 2022 and the conclusion arrived more than 3 years afterwards. In Glasgow, the disturbance was in May 2024 and the verdict came in January 2026, well over a year and a half later. 3 different cities, 3 different sets of circumstances, and in every single one, the same long wait between the harm and the answer. That wait is the price of doing this properly, and it is a price the families pay, not the system. Months pass, sometimes years. Anniversaries come and go with no resolution. The people who lost someone have to keep living their lives, or the most important question hanging over those lives stays open. It would be far quicker to skip the careful steps, to reach for an answer fast and move on. But fast answers are how the wrong people get blamed and the truth gets missed. The slowness, frustrating as it is the system refusing to cut corners on something this serious. And at the end of that slow road, in each of these 3 cases, an answer did finally arrive, settled and certain. The kind of answer that can only be reached by taking the time to be sure. There is something else that connects Glasgow to the cases before it, and it is the most human thread of all. Brian Gough was not a headline or a case number to the people who knew him. He was 27, He had a family. He had friends. The officer who spoke after the verdict did not describe a statistic. She described a devastated circle of people. The same kind of circle seen around Craig Dean in Birmingham and around Jackie Rotter in Merseyside. Every one of these cases, no matter how it is filed away or counted, comes back to the same thing in the end. Someone who was here and then was not, and a group of people left behind who will carry that for the rest of their lives. And remember where this video started. The opening figures showed a country that, measured year by year, was moving in a better direction, with some of the lowest yearly totals seen in a long time. Brian Gough's case is a quiet reminder of what those figures cannot hold. A chart can show a trend going the right way. It cannot show a Saturday on Saracen Street in 2024, or the disturbance that ended a young man's life, or the family who waited until the last days of January 2026 to hear a jury say what had happened. The trend and the tragedy are both real, sitting side by side, and a number on a page will never be able to carry the full weight of a single street on a single afternoon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So Glasgow gives another ending, another case where the long road ran all the way to its conclusion and a court spoke with full certainty. That makes 4 of those finished cases, 4 answers, 4 families given at least the small mercy of knowing. But the calendar pulls back now toward the cases that are still open, still unanswered, still waiting. And the next one returns to London, to a quiet residential street in the east of the city, where a woman was found inside her own home, and where the person arrested was not a stranger at all. Section 7. The Nessa Pounchney Chada. In the early hours of the 27th of January 2026, police were called to a home on a road called Applegarth Drive in Ilford, which sits in the London borough of Redbridge in the east of the city. The call came in at around 4 in the morning. When officers arrived, Vanessa was found dead at the address. A man named Dileep Chadha, who was 57 years old and lived at that same address, was arrested at the scene, and he was later charged with the most serious offence there is. That is the whole of the confirmed account. 5 plain facts. That is the whole of the confirmed account. A time, a place, a woman found inside a home, a man arrested there, a charge. This is an open case. It has not been to court. There is no public account of what led to that 4 in the morning call, or of what happened inside that home, and nothing on the record about the relationship between these 2 people, beyond the fact that they shared an address. So that is where it stops. But there are real things to say here, things that are true and that help in understanding the shape of a case like this, so the space is better used for those instead of for guesswork. The first thing worth understanding is what it means when a death happens inside a home rather than out in public, because it changes the whole texture of an investigation. The cases earlier in this video that ended in convictions often turned on the kind of evidence gathered from the outside world. Cameras on the street, a car traced across a city, forensic traces left in a vehicle. That works because public spaces are crowded with witnesses and watched by lenses from every angle. A home is the opposite. It is private by design. Often the only people who truly know what happened inside are the people who were there, and sometimes one of them is no longer able to say anything at all. That is part of why a death inside a home can be such a difficult thing to untangle, and part of why investigators move so carefully when they do. It is also why the detail that a suspect was arrested at the scene, at the same address, is reported the way it is, and why it has to be handled with real care. It is a fact. Police arrested a man who lived at that home. But a fact like that is not the same as a conclusion, and it is genuinely important not to let the mind slide from the one to the other. Being present at an address, or living there, or being arrested there, indicates where a person was. It does not, on its own, indicate what they did. Those are separate questions, and only one of them, the where, is currently answered. The what is exactly what a court exists to determine, and it has not done so. So the fact that the man arrested lived at the same address should be held as what it is, a piece of the picture, resisting the very natural pull to treat it as the whole picture. That pull is strong. When a person is found in their home and someone close is arrested, The mind wants to complete the story instantly. It feels obvious. It feels like the gap fills itself. But that instinct, the one that races ahead to a conclusion before any of the evidence has been tested, is the precise instinct the entire justice system is built to slow down. The law does not let a story complete itself in someone's head. It insists that the story be told properly, in front of the right people, with both sides heard, before anyone is judged. The man in this case has been charged. He has not been found responsible for anything, and the discomfort that comes from being asked to hold those two ideas apart is not a flaw in the system. It is the system doing its job, protecting the line between an accusation and a finding. The same line that would protect anyone ever standing on the wrong side of it. The second thing worth sitting with is the simple, human fact at the centre of all of this, which no amount of legal caution should ever crowd out. A woman is gone. Vanessa Pountney-Chadha was 58 years old. Whatever the courts eventually find about how and why, that part is not in question and never will be. She had a life, 58 years of one, with all the people and history and ordinary days that any life contains. The case will move through the system in its careful, deliberate way, measured in hearings and dates and legal terms. But underneath the procedure is a person who was here and is not anymore, and a circle of people who knew her and now have to live without her. The caution this video shows about the accused is exactly that. Caution about the accused. It is not coldness toward the woman who died. Both things can be true at once. There is no need to declare a man responsible before a court has, and at the very same time, there is room to hold real sorrow for the loss of Vanessa's life. Those are not in tension. They sit together. The third thing is the timeline, and it points straight toward the future. Vanessa was found at the end of January 2026. The man was arrested and charged within that same window. So where does the case go from here? It goes the way every one of the open cases in this video goes, down a long road toward a courtroom, on a timetable that stretches out far past the month the harm was done. Think back to the finished cases. Birmingham took around 18 months from the harm to the verdict. Merseyside took more than 3 years. Glasgow took well over a year and a half. There is no reason to expect this one to be any quicker, which means that, as of now, the Ilford case is almost certainly still open, still moving slowly through its early stages, the questions still unanswered, the courtroom still somewhere ahead. And that is genuinely where it sits, waiting. There is no ending here of the kind Birmingham and Merseyside and Glasgow had, because that ending does not exist yet for this case. What is known about Ilford is small, and that is all this section can give. There is one more reason this case belongs in the video exactly where it is, and it ties back to a thread running through this video since the start. The earlier open case, in Inverness, involved men who, as far as the public record shows, may not have been closely connected before that morning. This case is reported differently, with a suspect who shared the victim's own address. And it is a quiet, sobering reminder of something this video keeps circling back to: the danger people instinctively fear, the stranger, the intruder, the threat from outside, is only one part of the real picture. A great deal of the most serious harm in any given month happens not out in the world, but inside homes, between people who were already part of each other's lives. That is an uncomfortable truth. It is also, by every honest measure, a true one, and looking away from it does not make anyone safer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So Ilford is left as an open question, the way the law currently leaves it, with sorrow for the woman who died and patience for the process that will, in time, decide the rest. The next case stays in London and stays among the open cases, but it carries a particular weight of its own because of how long the person at the centre of it held on. He was harmed on one day in late January, but he did not lose his life that day. He fought for it for more than a week, and the date he finally passed is the reason his case is counted the way it is. Section 8. Suleiman Nuh. Suleiman Nuh was 25 years old. On the 29th of January 2026, at around 27 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, he was harmed on a road called Alvanley Gardens in West Hampstead in the London borough of Camden. He was taken to hospital. He did not pass away that day. He held on. For more than a week, he remained alive, and it was not until the 9th of February that he died from the injuries he had suffered. A man named Dylan Gann, who was 21 years old and lived on a road called Lethos Road in Camden, was arrested on the 30th of January, the day after Suleiman was harmed. At that point, Gann was charged with attempting to take Suleiman's life. Then, after Suleiman died, the situation changed. On the 12th of February, the Metropolitan Police confirmed they were now treating the case as a suspected loss of life rather than an attempt. And on the 2nd of March, Gann was charged with the most serious offence there is. The same line that applies to every open case applies here. Dylan Gann has been charged. He has not been convicted. The public record gives the dates, the locations, and the sequence of charges, but not an account of what happened on Alvanley Gardens that afternoon. So the rest of this section walks through the thing that makes this case worth understanding, which is the way it changed shape across those days. Start with that gap between the two dates. Harmed on the 29th of January, passed away on the 9th of February. 11 days. For 11 days, Suleiman Nuh was still alive, in hospital, and during those days this was not, in the eyes of the law, a case about someone losing their life. It could not be, because he had not lost it. He was fighting. And so when Gann was arrested the day after and charged, the charge reflected the reality of that exact moment. It was a charge about attempting to take a life, because at that moment the life had not been taken. The young man was still there, still holding on. This shows something important and often misunderstood about how charges work. A charge is not fixed in stone the instant it is laid. It reflects the situation as it stands at the time, and if the situation changes in a fundamental way, the charge can change with it. That is not the system flip-flopping or getting it wrong the first time. It is the system staying accurate. While Suleiman was alive, the honest charge was about an attempt. Once he died, the honest charge became something graver, because the most serious possible outcome had now actually happened. The law followed the facts. As the facts changed, so did the words. That shift is laid out plainly in the dates. The arrest and the first charge came on the 30th of January, the day after. Then the 11 days passed, and Suleiman died on the 9th of February. 3 days after that, on the 12th, the police publicly confirmed they were now treating the matter as a suspected loss of life. And then, after the work needed to bring a graver charge, Gann was charged with the most serious offence on the 2nd of March. Each of those steps lines up with the reality at the time. Each one followed from what was actually true at that point, not from a guess about what might happen next. That is the system being careful in real time, adjusting as the hardest facts of all unfolded over the course of those weeks. There is something quietly heavy in that 11-day gap, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, separate from all the legal mechanics. Behind those dates is a young man of 25 fighting for his life in a hospital, and a family beside him almost certainly hoping, through every one of those 11 days, that he would pull through. The legal timeline is clean and procedural. The human reality underneath it was not clean at all. It was 11 days of waiting, of hoping, and then, on the 9th of February, of the worst possible news. The charges that changed on paper were tracking something agonising happening to real people in a real hospital room. It is easy when dates are listed to forget what those dates actually contained. They contained a family's last days with their son. Suleiman was 25. That is the age that should anchor everything else in this case. Not the legal terms, not the shifting charges, but the simple fact of a 25-year-old who is no longer here. Whatever a court eventually decides about how and why, that part is settled and permanent. A young man with, presumably, most of his life still ahead of him, gone. The careful language this video uses about the person who has been charged is not, and never will be, an attempt to soften that loss or push it to one side. The two things live together. Real sorrow for Suleiman and real fairness toward a man who, as of now, stands accused and nothing more. There is one more confirmed detail in this case that is worth explaining, because it speaks to something investigators do deliberately, and it matters for the community around a case like this. A senior officer in the Metropolitan Police, after Suleiman was harmed, said that this was believed to have been an isolated incident and that there was no information at the time to suggest it was racially motivated. Those are careful, specific words, and they are chosen for a reason. When something serious happens on a residential street in a city, the people who live nearby are often frightened, and not just for the person who was harmed. They are frightened for themselves. They start to wonder whether their own street has suddenly become dangerous, whether whatever happened could happen again, whether they or their children are now at risk walking the same pavements. The phrase isolated incident is the police speaking directly to that fear. It is the police saying, based on what is known so far, this does not appear to be part of a wider pattern. It does not appear to be something that puts the rest of the community in ongoing danger. It is a piece of reassurance, offered carefully and with the honest caveat that it reflects what is known at the time. The second part, about there being no information to suggest it was racially motivated, does similar work. In a diverse city, when harm comes to someone, communities can understandably worry about whether they were targeted because of who they are. That kind of fear can spread fast and can do real damage to how safe and how welcome people feel. So the police, when they have no information pointing that way, say so, plainly and early, precisely to stop that particular fear from taking hold without cause. Again, it is framed honestly, as a reflection of the information available at the time, not as a final pronouncement. But the intent is clear. It is about steadying a community, not leaving it to spiral. Both of those statements show a side of policing that does not always get attention. Beyond the gathering of evidence and the making of arrests, there is this other job, the job of talking to a frightened neighbourhood and giving it honest, careful information so that fear does not run ahead of fact. A street where something serious has happened is a shaken place. The people on it need to know whether to be afraid for themselves, and the police, where they honestly can, try to answer that. Step back and look at how this case fits with the others, because it adds a new dimension to the picture this video has been building. The open cases so far have shown different settings. A morning confrontation outside a property in Inverness, a woman found inside her own home in Ilford, and now a young man harmed on a residential street in West Hampstead in the late afternoon at nearly 4:30, the kind of hour when ordinary life is fully underway, people coming and going, the day still bright. Each of these open cases is different in its setting and its circumstances, and each one is still unanswered, still waiting for a court. But this one adds the dimension of time in a way the others did not. The 11 days, the changing charges, the slow and painful unfolding of an outcome that was not fixed at the start. And remember once more where this video began. The opening figures showed a city moving, year on year, in a better direction. And it is worth putting real numbers to that now, because Suleiman Nu's case sits directly against them. London recorded 97 homicides across the whole of 2025, down from 109 the year before. That is a fall of 11% in a single year, and it is the lowest total the capital had seen since 2014, 11 years earlier. Over that same 11-year stretch, London's population grew by more than 500,000 people, which means the rate, the chance for any one person, fell even further than the raw count suggests. It now stands at 1.1 homicides for every 100,000 people, the lowest figure on record for the city. The progress was sharpest exactly where a case like this one hurts most, among the young. The number of teenage victims in London across the whole of 2025 fell to 8. Not 800, not 80. 8. In a city of nearly 9 million, and the lowest such figure in almost 3 decades. London also recorded the fewest deaths of people under 25 this century. Alongside that, violent incidents that left someone injured fell by around a fifth in a year, and incidents involving firearms were running at less than half of where they had sat 7 years earlier. The Met also reported that around 95% of its homicide investigations that year reached what it called a positive outcome, which points to the kind of patient work seen in the convicted cases earlier in this video. Now hold every one of those figures next to a single afternoon on Alvanley Gardens. A 25-year-old man, harmed at 27 minutes past 4, who held on for 11 days in a hospital before he died on the 9th of February. Suleiman Nuh is not visible anywhere in that list of improving numbers. He is not the 11%. He is not the rate of 1.1. He is one person. And the figures, however real and however genuinely encouraging, were never built to hold what happened to him or what his family carried through those 11 days. That is the whole tension this video keeps returning to, because it is the most important one. A trend is made of months, and a month is made of people. And the people do not disappear just because the average improves. The chart can fall, and a family can still be sitting at a hospital bedside, watching the worst thing that will ever happen to them unfold, one day at a time. So Suleiman Nuh's case sits with the other open ones, unresolved, its central questions still ahead of it, the courtroom still somewhere in the distance. What can be said is held to what is confirmed. The dates, the places, the sequence of charges, the careful words offered to a worried community. What cannot be said is left alone, the way the law leaves it alone for now, until the proper time and the proper place. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One open case is left on the calendar that landed at the very edge of the month, on its final day, and then the video reaches the case it has been holding back from the start, the one moved deliberately to the end. The next is the 31st of January, a street in northwest London, and a loss that came on the last day the month had to give. Section 9. Amal Raytan. The nextal case that began in January landed right at the edge of it, on the very last day the month had to give, the 31st of January 2026. Amal Raytan was 50 years old. On the 31st of January, at around 4 in the afternoon, she was harmed on a road called Pound Lane in Willesden, in the London borough of Brent, in the northwest of the city. She died at the scene. Later that same evening, a man named Najib Raytan, who was 25 years old and lived on Harlesden Road in the NW10 area, was arrested. A short time afterwards, on the 2nd of February, he was charged with the most serious offence there is. He was Amal's son. That last detail is on the public record, included here because it is confirmed, but it needs handling with real care because it is exactly the kind of fact that the mind wants to run away with. A son, arrested in connection with the loss of his mother. It is a detail that lands hard, and the instinct is to let it complete the whole story on its own. But it is worth holding back from that for the reason that follows. This case has not been to court. Najib Raytan has been charged. He has not been found responsible for anything. There is no public account of what happened on Pound Lane that afternoon. The relationship between the two people is known, the events between them are not. Those are very different things, and only one of them is currently on the record. So the space is better used the honest way, with things that are true and that help in understanding a case shaped like this one. The first is the speed of it, because that is one of the few things the confirmed facts actually reveal. Amal was harmed at around 4 in the afternoon. The arrest came later the same evening. That is fast. Within hours, the police had identified someone and made an arrest. And it is worth understanding what a same-day arrest does and, just as importantly, what it does not do. What it shows is that the investigation moved quickly and that the police believed, early and with enough confidence to act, that they had identified a person to bring into the process. That is genuinely significant in terms of how an investigation unfolds. A fast arrest means evidence is preserved while it is fresh, accounts are taken while memories are sharp, and the careful work of building or testing a case can begin straight away, rather than after a long search. But here is what a same-day arrest does not show, and this is the part that matters most. It does not reveal the outcome. An arrest is not a verdict. It is not even a charge, which comes after. It is the police saying, in effect, that there are grounds to bring this person into the process and ask questions. The process then has to run its full course, all the way to a courtroom, before anyone can say what a person is actually responsible for. The speed at the start says nothing about the conclusion at the end. A case can be opened in hours and still take many months, even years, to reach its answer. And that answer is never decided by how fast the first arrest came. This brings the focus to the harder thing, the family connection, and why it is so important to hold it carefully, rather than let it settle into a conclusion. When the person arrested is the victim's son, the mind wants to close the loop immediately. It feels like the detail explains itself. But that instinct, the one that turns a relationship into a verdict in a single leap, is precisely the instinct the entire justice system exists to interrupt. A family relationship is a fact about who two people were to each other. It is not, on its own, a fact about what happened between them on a particular afternoon. The first is known. The second is exactly what a court has to determine, and it has not determined it. Asking anyone to hold those two ideas apart can feel almost unnatural, especially with a detail this emotionally heavy. But think about why the law insists on it. The principle that a person is treated as not responsible until a court, having heard everything, decides otherwise, does not switch off because a case involves a family or because a detail makes the mind jump ahead. If anything, that is when it matters most, because that is when the pull toward an early conclusion is strongest, and an early conclusion reached before the evidence is tested is exactly how injustice happens. The same protection that feels frustrating here is the protection anyone would be desperate for if they were ever the person who had been arrested but not yet tried. So Najib Raitan has been charged, and that is the precise and honest truth of where this case stands. Nothing more has been decided, and underneath all of that careful language, there is a woman who is gone. Amal Raitan was 50 years old. Whatever the courts eventually find about how she came to lose her life, the loss itself is real and permanent and not in any doubt. 50 years of a life, and the people who knew her now left without her. The caution this video shows toward the man who has been charged takes nothing away from that. It is possible, and necessary, to do both at once, to refuse to declare anyone responsible before a court has, and to feel the full weight of a life ended. Those two things do not compete. They belong side by side, and they have throughout every case in this video. There is something quietly fitting and quietly sad about where this case falls on the calendar. The 31st of January, the last day of the month. The video opened with a year-end picture of a country that, measured in yearly totals, was moving in a better direction, with some of the lowest figures seen in over a decade. And the month traced through this video, the first month of that supposedly safer year, did not close quietly. It closed with a loss on a northwest London street at 4 in the afternoon, on the final day it had. The month ran right up to its last page and still had this in it. That is the thread this whole video has been pulling on, and Amal Raitan's case ties it off with painful clarity. A chart can show a trend moving the right way, and that trend can be real and worth reporting honestly. But a chart cannot show the 31st of January on Pound Lane. It cannot hold the specific loss of one 50-year-old woman on the last afternoon of the month. The trend going down and this happening anyway are not contradictions. They are both simply true, and the figures, helpful as they are, will never be able to carry the weight of a single street on a single afternoon. The numbers count the cases, they cannot hold the people. It is also worth noticing how this case, the last to begin, sits alongside the open cases that came before it, because together they sketch something honest about a single month. There's been a confrontation outside a property in the far north of Scotland in the early morning. A woman found inside her own home in East London in the small hours. A young man harmed on a residential street in West Hampstead in the late afternoon, who held on for 11 days. And now a woman harmed on a street in northwest London at 4 in the afternoon on the final day of the month, with an arrest the same evening. Different parts of the country, different times of day, different settings, some in public, some inside homes. What they share is not their circumstances but their status. Every one of them is still open, every one is still waiting for a court. And in every one, the most honest and most accurate thing this video can say is that the answer has not come yet. That shared status is not a weakness in the storytelling, it is the truth of recent cases, told honestly. Looking at a month this close to the present, most of its serious cases are exactly here, in this suspended state, opened but not concluded, arrested but not judged. The finished cases earlier in this video, the ones from Birmingham and Merseyside and Glasgow and the Essex coast, only reached their endings because the harm in those cases happened a year or more before the verdicts landed in January. The open cases are what January itself actually produced, and January's own cases are, almost by definition, still unfinished. That is simply where they are. To pretend otherwise, to invent endings the courts have not reached, would betray the single promise this video is built on, that everything in it actually happened and is actually known. So Amal Raytan's case closes the walk through the cases that began in January, and it closes it the way most of those cases genuinely stand, unresolved, its central questions still ahead of it, held to what is confirmed and silent on what is not. A fast arrest, a charge, a family connection on the record. A woman of 50, gone from a northwest London street on the last day of the month. And a process that, in its slow and deliberate way, will in time decide the rest. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is one case not yet told, and it is not a new one. It is the case this video deliberately set aside at the very beginning and carried all the way to the end, because it sits right at the other edge of the month, on the first day of the year, rather than the last. The journey goes back now, all the way back, to the 1st of January, to a flat in South London, and to the loss that opened the year before almost anyone had even begun to live it. Section 10. Kaleem Sheikh. A man named Kaleem Sheikh, who was 41 years old and was a citizen of India, was found dead at a home on a road called Bondway, in Vauxhall, in the London borough of Lambeth, in the early evening of the 1st of January 2026, at around 8 o'clock. He had suffered a wound to the neck. A man named Daniel Levy, who was 48 years old and also lived on Bondway, was arrested that same day. 2 days later, on the 3rd of January, he was charged with the most serious offence there is. The same applies here, on the first case of the year. Daniel Levy has been charged. He has not been convicted. There is no public account of what happened inside that home on Bondway. What is known is the place, the date, the time, the manner of the wound, and the sequence of the arrest and the charge. The rest belongs to a courtroom that has not yet sat. Start with the date, because it carries a weight the others did not. The 1st of January, New Year's Day. It is for most people a day soaked in a particular kind of meaning. It is the day of fresh starts, of the year stretched out ahead full of things that have not happened yet, of the sense, however small, that a page has turned and something new is beginning. It is, in a quiet way, one of the most hopeful days on the calendar. And it was on that day, in the early evening, with the new year only hours old, that Kaleem Sheikh lost his life. There is no getting around how hard that contrast lands. The day built around beginnings became, for one man and the people who knew him, an ending. That contrast is worth sitting with because it says something honest about the whole picture this video has been drawing. Harm does not check the calendar. It does not pause for the symbolism of a fresh start. The same hopeful day that millions of people spent resting, or recovering, or quietly making plans for the year ahead, was also the day this happened. The year did not ease in gently before turning serious. It opened, on its first evening, with a loss. And the year-end figures this video began with, the ones showing a country moving in a better direction, could not have looked further away on the 1st of January. Because the New Year's count started not at 0 and holding, but with this, right at the top of the page. The second thing worth understanding is a detail that is easy to pass over but genuinely matters, which is that Kaleem Sheikh was a citizen of India. He was not, as far as the record shows, a Londoner by origin. He was a man from another country who was in the capital and who lost his life there on the first day of the year. That detail opens onto something true about a city like London, and about cases like this one. London is one of the most international cities on earth. People come to it from everywhere, to work, to study, to build something, to be near family, for every reason a person ever moves anywhere. And that means that when harm comes to someone in London, it does not only ripple out across the city, sometimes it ripples across the world. A loss in a flat in Vauxhall can mean a phone call to a family in another country, people thousands of miles away receiving the worst possible news about someone who had travelled far from home. The grief does not stay local. It crosses borders, lands in another place entirely, and has to be carried by people who may never have seen the street where it happened. There is a particular sadness in that, the distance involved. A family far away, learning that someone they loved is gone, in a city they may not know, on the first day of a year they had every reason to face with hope. The legal process that follows will unfold in London, in a London courtroom, on a British timetable. But the loss itself reaches all the way back to wherever Kaleem Sheikh came from, to the people there who knew him as a son, or a brother, or a friend, and who now have to absorb something that happened an entire world away. The case is a London case. The grief is not bound by any city or any border. The third thing is the speed of the response, because the confirmed facts reveal something about it. Kaleem was found at around 8 in the evening on the 1st. A man was arrested that same day. And then, just 2 days later, on the 3rd, that man was charged. That is a quick sequence, and it is worth understanding the same way as the fast arrest in the last case. The speed shows the investigation moved decisively, that the police believed early on that they had identified someone, and that they acted on it without delay. Moving fast preserves evidence while it is fresh, and gets the careful work of the process started straight away. But, exactly as before, the speed at the start says nothing about the finish. A quick arrest and a quick charge are the opening moves of the process, not its conclusion. The charge laid on the 3rd of January is an accusation that now has to be tested, all the way through to a courtroom, before anyone can say what Daniel Levy is actually responsible for. The fact that it came within 2 days does not bring the answer any closer in terms of certainty. It only means the question was asked early. The answer still lies at the end of the long road every one of these cases has to travel, and that road, for this case, is still being walked. And beneath all of that, once again, is a person. Kaleem Sheikh was 41 years old. Whatever a court eventually finds about how he came to lose his life, the loss is real, settled, and permanent. 41 years of a life ended on the first evening of the year in a city far from where that life began. The careful language about the man who has been charged does not soften that, and is not meant to. The sorrow for Kaleem and the fairness owed to the accused sit together, the way they have in every case in this video. Both can be held. Both have to be. It is fitting, in a hard way, that this case closes the walk through the month, even though it opened the month itself, because it brings everything full circle, right back to the contrast this video has carried from its very first words. This video began with a country that, by the measure of a yearly chart, was getting safer, with the lowest totals seen in more than a decade. Real progress, honestly reported. And here, on the first day of the very next year, that progress meets its limit, because no falling trend, however genuine, could prevent the 1st of January from carrying this. The chart and the flat on Bondway are both true at the same time. They always were. That has been the point all along. Think about the span this video has covered, now that both ends of it are in view. The 1st of January, a man found in a flat in Vauxhall as the year began. The 31st of January, a woman harmed on a street in Willesden as the month closed. And between those two edges, a whole month of cases stretched across the country, from the Highlands of Scotland to the southeast of England, from the very young to people in their late 50s, some in public and some inside homes, some now answered by the courts, and most still waiting. Kaleem Sheikh's case is one of the waiting ones. Its central questions are still ahead of it. The courtroom is still somewhere in the distance, and so it is left where it honestly sits, held to the confirmed facts, silent on what is not yet known, and carrying real sorrow for a man whose year and whose life ended on the day everyone else was only beginning theirs. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the full sweep of the month as first mapped. But a month is rarely as tidy as a list makes it look, and the country does not stop at the edges of the cases covered so far. Beyond London and the Highlands, other parts of the United Kingdom carried their own losses in those same weeks, in cities not yet visited in this video. The next is one of them, a case from elsewhere in the country that belongs in this month just as much as any already told. Section 11. Joe Burton. On Wednesday the 31st of December 2025, in Bury, which is a town in Greater Manchester in the northwest of England, There was an incident in which a young man lost his life. He was 23 years old and his name was Joe Burton. In the days that immediately followed, a man named Anthony Jr. Murray, who was born in September 2000 and lived on a road called Tarn Drive, was charged in connection with the death, along with a charge relating to a bladed article. He was remanded in custody, which means he was held rather than released, and he was due to appear at Manchester Minchell Street Crown Court on Monday the 5th of January 2026. A woman in her 20s had also been arrested, but she was released on bail while inquiries continued, and the investigation as a whole remained open. The same line applies here. Anthony Jr. Murray has been charged. He has not been convicted. There is no public account of what happened in Bury that day, because the case was only just reaching court in those first days of January, so the rest of this section draws out what the case shows. The first is that detail about the woman in her 20s, because it teaches something important about how arrests and charges actually work, and how they differ. 2 people were arrested in connection with this death, but only one was charged. The other was released on bail while the investigation continued. Those are 2 very different outcomes, and the difference between them matters. Being arrested is the early step. It means the police have grounds to detain someone and ask them questions as part of working out what happened. But an arrest is not an accusation that sticks automatically. After an arrest, the investigators have to look at what they actually have. Sometimes that leads to a charge, which is the formal step of bringing a person into the court process, and sometimes it does not, at least not yet, and the person is released, often on bail, while the work goes on. That is what happened with the woman in this case. She was arrested, and then she was released on bail, with the investigation still open around her. Her arrest did not become a charge in those early days. It stayed an arrest, and that is a meaningfully different thing. This is worth understanding because the words get blurred together so easily in everyday talk. People say arrested as though it means the same as charged, and charged as though it means the same as responsible. But these are 3 separate stages, and a person can stop at any one of them. Arrested but not charged, charged but not found responsible. The whole system is built out of these careful steps, each one a higher bar than the last, and a person only moves up to the next step if the evidence actually carries them there. In this single case, in those first January days, 2 of those stages sat side by side. One person charged and held, one person arrested and released. The same incident, 2 different places in the process. The second thing this case shows is what an open investigation actually looks like from the outside, and how the police try to use the public as part of it. Notice that even after a charge had been brought, the investigation was described as ongoing, and the police asked anyone with information to come forward. They specifically asked for things like camera footage from the area, the kind of recordings that come from doorbells, from dashboard cameras in passing cars, from the cameras fixed to buildings. That request points to something true about how modern investigations are pieced together. They are not solved in a single moment of insight. They are built, slowly, out of fragments, and a lot of those fragments now come from the ordinary cameras that quietly record daily life all around. A doorbell facing a street, a car parked with its camera running. Each one might hold a few seconds that matter, and the police casting that net wide is them trying to gather every fragment they can while the events are still fresh. There is something else in that public appeal worth noticing, which is what it says about the relationship between the police and the community around a case. When something serious happens in a town, the people who live there are not just bystanders. They can hold pieces of the picture without even realizing it. A clip on a phone, something seen from a window. The appeal is the police acknowledging that and asking the community to be part of the work of understanding what happened. A case like this is not solved by the police alone, in isolation. It is often solved with the help of the very neighbourhood it happened in. But underneath all of the process, the stages, the appeals, the careful language, there is the same hard fact that sits at the centre of every case in this video. A young man is gone. Joe Burton was 23 years old. Whatever the courts eventually determine about how he came to lose his life, that part is settled and permanent and beyond any dispute. 23 years of a life, ended on the last day of a year, with his family left to begin the new one carrying a loss they could never have seen coming. The police said his family were being supported by specially trained officers as they grieved. That is a small, quiet detail in an official statement, but it points to something real. Behind the case number and the court date is a family in the rawest days of grief, being walked through a process none of them ever wanted to be part of. Think about the timing of that, and how cruel it is in its own particular way. The 31st of December is, for most people, a night of endings and beginnings, the threshold between one year and the next, often spent among family and friends, with some sense of hope about what is coming. For Joe Burton's family, that threshold became the worst night of their lives, and the new year did not arrive as a fresh start at all. It arrived as the first year they would have to live without him. The calendar turned for everyone else the way it always does. For them, it turned into something else entirely. And this is where the case ties back to the very heart of what this video has been about from its first words. This video opened with a year-end picture, the figures showing a country that, measured across 12 months, was moving in a better direction. Those figures draw a clean line at the end of December and start counting again in January, as though a year is a tidy, self-contained thing. But Joe Burton's case shows how false that tidiness can be. His death fell on the last day of one year, and its story unfolded in the first days of the next. The harm did not respect the line on the calendar, and neither did the grief. A chart can divide time into neat blocks of 12 months. Real loss does not arrange itself so politely. It happens when it happens, and it spills across whatever line has been drawn, because the people living through it are not counting years. They are just trying to get through the next day. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the last of the cases where someone has been arrested and brought into the process. But there is one more, and it is different from every case before it, because when the public record behind it was set down, no one had been arrested at all. It is the case of a woman found in her own home in a town not yet visited, and it shows what the very beginning of an investigation looks like, when the people trying to find answers are starting with almost nothing. Section 12. Beata Sauer. On Wednesday the 7th of January 2026, a 46-year-old woman named Beata Sauer was found dead at her home on Brook Street in Luton. No one had been arrested. No one had been charged. There was a woman who had lost her life, an investigation just getting started, and an appeal to the public for help. That was it. And that is what makes this case different from every other one in this video. In all the others, by the time the facts reached the public record, the process was already visibly underway, with a named person moving through it, arrested, often charged. Here, none of that had happened yet. Precisely because it is so bare, this case shows something none of the others could. What the very beginning of one of these actually looks like. When she was first found, it was not immediately clear what had happened. The police launched an initial inquiry into the circumstances of her death and ordered a forensic post-mortem examination, which is the detailed medical examination used to establish how a person died. That examination indicated that her death was likely to have been the result of a stab wound. At that point, the case was passed to a specialist team, the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit, which reviewed the evidence and launched a full investigation into her death. The investigation was given an operational name, Operation Elian. The senior officer leading it, Detective Chief Inspector Sam Canner, said the team was working hard to establish the circumstances of Beata's death and was following a number of lines of inquiry, and the police made a specific appeal. The last confirmed sighting of Beata was in Luton on Sunday the 21st of December, and so they asked anyone who knew her or who had any information about the period between when she was last seen and when her body was discovered to come forward. Here the situation is slightly different. In the other open cases, the point was that a charged person has not been convicted. In this one, at the point the account here was set down, no arrest had been announced and no one had been charged. So there is less to say about who, and what there is instead is the early stage of an investigation. Look first at how this case even became a case, because it is not as obvious as it might seem. In most of the cases in this video, it was clear from the first moment that something serious had happened. Someone was found with obvious injuries, a confrontation had been witnessed. The nature of the event was not in doubt, even if everything else was. This case did not begin that way. A woman was found dead at home, and at first the circumstances were unclear. It was not immediately obvious what had happened to her. The police had to do the careful work of finding out, and the thing that turned this from an unexplained death into a murder investigation was the forensic post-mortem examination, the medical examination that revealed she had most likely died of a stab wound. That detail is worth sitting with, because it shows how much of this work is genuinely about discovery rather than pursuit. Investigations are easy to imagine as a chase, the police already knowing a serious act has occurred and hunting for who did it. But sometimes the first job is simply to work out what happened at all. A person is found and the cause is not clear, and it takes patient, expert examination to establish whether a death was natural or accidental or something else entirely. In Beata Sauer's case, it was that examination that revealed the truth, and it was only then that the full machinery of a murder investigation was set in motion. Without that careful medical work, the nature of her death might not have been understood at all. The science is not a side detail here, it is the thing that made the case a case. It is worth explaining what a forensic post-mortem examination actually is, because it does so much of the quiet work at the start of cases like this one. When a person dies and the cause is not clear, the death does not simply get written down as a mystery and forgotten. A specialist examination is carried out by a doctor trained specifically to establish how someone died, looking for injuries, for signs of illness, for anything the body can reveal about its final hours. It is careful, methodical work, and it is the difference between a death that is assumed and a death that is understood. In a great many cases, the examination confirms something natural or accidental, and the matter goes no further. In others, like this one, it uncovers something that turns an unexplained death into a criminal investigation. That is why the examination is not a formality, but a turning point. Until it was done, Beata Sauer's death was an open question, its cause genuinely unknown. It was the examination that established she had most likely died of a stab wound, and only then did the full weight of a major investigation move into place. The science did not just describe what had happened, it was the thing that revealed there was a case to investigate at all. The second thing this case shows is what an investigation looks like when it is starting from a wide open question. And the answer is that it leans heavily on time. Notice the gap the police were focused on. The last confirmed sighting of Beata was on the 21st of December. Her body was found on the 7th of January. That is more than 2 weeks, a long stretch of unknown time, and the appeal to the public was built entirely around it. The police were not asking the public to identify a suspect. They were asking people to help them fill in time, to account for the days and movements between when Beata was last seen alive and when she was found. Who saw her and when? What she did in those weeks? Anything that could help build a picture of that missing stretch. That is the unglamorous heart of an early investigation. Before there can be a suspect, there often has to be a timeline, a careful reconstruction of a person's last days and movements, and the public holds far more of that timeline than any single detective ever could. Someone saw her in a shop. Someone passed her on a street. Someone spoke to her or noticed something on one of those days. Each of those small fragments, gathered together, starts to form a shape, and out of that shape an investigation can begin to move. The appeal for information is not a formality. In a case that starts this open, with the circumstances unclear and a long, unaccounted stretch of time, the public's small pieces of knowledge may be the most valuable evidence there is. There is something about this case, precisely because it is so bare, that brings the human reality into sharp focus. Strip away the named suspect, the arrest, the court date, all the machinery that the other cases had, and what is left is the simplest and hardest fact of all. A woman went about her life, was last seen on a December day, and was later found dead in her own home. And for a time, even the people whose job it is to find out did not yet know exactly what had happened to her. Beata Sauer was 46 years old. She had a life and people who knew her, and the appeal itself, asking anyone who knew her to come forward, is a quiet reminder that she was a person embedded in a community, not just an entry in a case file. The investigation is the start of the effort to understand how that life came to end, and to give her family the answers they need. Think too about the timing of it, because it echoes the very first case in this video. This video opened in Leeds on the first morning of January, with a death that crossed into a brand new year. This case sits right alongside it. Beata was last seen on the 21st of December, in the final days of the old year, and found on the 7th of January, in the first days of the new one. Her case, like the one this video began with, spans the turn of the year, beginning in the dwindling days of one and only fully surfacing in the opening days of the next. The new year arrived for everyone. For Beata Sauer's family, it arrived carrying a loss they were only beginning to understand. And this is where the case ties back to the thread this whole video has been pulling on from its first words. The subject is a single month, and a single month, looked at closely, is not a tidy thing. It does not begin cleanly on the 1st and end cleanly on the 31st. Its cases reach backward into the year before and forward into the months ahead. Beata was last seen in December. Her body was found in January. The investigation into her death was, at the point on the record here, only just beginning, its answers still somewhere in the future. That is the honest texture of recent events. They are not neat. They do not resolve on schedule. They begin in the middle of ordinary life and unfold slowly. And a great many of them, looked at this close to the present, are exactly where Beata Sauer's case was. Open, unanswered, and still being pieced together, one fragment at a time. So that is the last of the 12. From a New Year's morning in Leeds to a home in Luton, where an investigation was only just finding its feet, this video has crossed the whole of the United Kingdom and the seam between 2 years, through cases the courts have already closed with certainty and cases that had barely begun. Set against the figures from the start, a country that, by the measure of a yearly chart, was getting safer, these 12 are the reminder of what no chart can hold. A trend is made of months, a month is made of days, and every one of those days belonged to someone, a person who was here and then was not, and a family left to carry it. The numbers can fall, and all of this can still be true. Both things are real at once, and that, more than any single case, is what a single month reveals when it is looked at this closely. These stories, and the people at the heart of them, are worth sitting with. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.